German infantry squad in the Pacific Theatre or the fields of Normandy would sometimes report something that made no tactical sense. A small group of American soldiers, badly outnumbered, putting out a volume of fire that suggested a force 2 or 3 times their actual size. Commanders who hadn't yet faced American infantry up close assumed they were dealing with more men than were actually there. They weren't. They were dealing with one rifle. And understanding why that rifle existed, why it almost didn't, and what it ultimately proved about the future of infantry combat is a story that runs straight through some of the most consequential decisions of the entire war. Every major army that entered the Second World War still equipped its infantry with bolt-action rifles. The German Karabiner 98K, the British Lee Enfield, the Japanese Arisaka. All of them required a soldier to manually cycle the bolt between every shot, limiting a trained rifleman to somewhere between 8 and 15 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions. It was the same fundamental technology that had equipped infantry for decades, refined and improved, but not reimagined. The Americans had something different. The M1 Garand was semi-automatic, meaning it fired a new round with every pull of the trigger without any manual action required from the shooter. A trained soldier could put out 30 to 50 aimed rounds per minute. Against bolt-action infantry, that difference was not incremental. It was generational. But the Garand almost never existed in the form that went to war, and the version that nearly replaced it would have been even more revolutionary. Through the late 1920s and into the early 1930s, 2 competing rifle designs were being tested by the American military, both semi-automatic but chambered for fundamentally different cartridges. John Garand's design used the standard point .30-06 round the army already stockpiled in enormous quantities. A rival designer named Patton argued for something smaller, a 276 caliber cartridge with roughly half the recoil energy of the .30-06, lighter to carry, easier to control, and still more than lethal at the ranges where combat actually happened. Ballistic tests, conducted using anesthetized pigs at various ranges rather than gel, found that smaller calibers actually inflicted more severe wounds at typical combat distances. Patton's rifle, feeding from a 10-round clip, outperformed almost everything else in trials. America was on the verge of adopting an intermediate cartridge rifle a full decade before the Germans would develop the concept with the STG-44. Then one man intervened. General Douglas MacArthur, Army Chief of Staff, looked at the situation in 1932 and made a decision that was entirely logical given the circumstances. The country was deep in the Great Depression. The Army held vast stockpiles of .30-06 ammunition left over from the First World War. Retooling production for an entirely new cartridge while the economy was collapsing was simply not going to happen. MacArthur killed the 276 program outright. Patton's rifle died with it. Garand, who had been developing a parallel .30-06 prototype as a contingency, pivoted to that design without having to rebuild from scratch. In 1936, the semi-automatic rifle caliber .30 M1 entered service, the Garand, as history would come to know it. Its operating system was elegantly simple. Gas tapped from the barrel after each shot drove a piston rearward, cycling the bolt and chambering the next round automatically. 8 rounds loaded into the receiver via an N-block clip that ejected with a distinctive metallic sound when the last round was fired. A skilled soldier could reload in under 2 seconds. The rifle weighed around 9.5 pounds, was robust enough to withstand prolonged field use, and required no specialized technique to operate at speed beyond basic training. On paper, it was a significant advance, but paper and combat are different environments entirely, and the Garand's first real test came under conditions that would have broken lesser designs. The defense of Patton in late 1941 and early 1942 was a fighting retreat under brutal conditions. American and Filipino troops held out for 3 months against a larger Japanese force, undersupplied, outgunned in artillery, and fighting in tropical heat that fouled equipment rapidly. The M1 Garand performed. MacArthur, the same man who had strangled the 276 program a decade earlier, sent back a report from that campaign praising the rifle explicitly, noting it had remained functional through a week of continuous action without cleaning. It was as close to an official reversal as military bureaucracy allowed. The rifle's reputation spread quickly after Patton. When Marine units landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942, many were still carrying M1903 Springfield bolt actions out of an institutional caution about the newer design. Army reinforcements arrived in October carrying Garands, and Marines rapidly concluded the rifle was worth having. Some acquired them through official channels. Many did not. The gap in firepower was too obvious to ignore once it was visible in actual combat. That gap was felt even more sharply by the enemies facing it. German infantry doctrine had been built around the machine gun as the primary source of squad firepower, with bolt-action riflemen providing support. It was a sound system against opponents similarly equipped. Against American squads where every rifleman could sustain semi-automatic fire independently, the equation shifted. The Germans recognized the problem and attempted to answer it. Their own semi-automatic rifle program, the G41, had been hamstrung by a standing order prohibiting gas ports drilled into barrels, a restriction based on unfounded fears about structural integrity. The result was an overcomplicated design that proved unreliable and was built in numbers too small to matter. It took the capture of Soviet SVT-40 rifles on the Eastern Front, rifles that used exactly the gas port system the German High Command had banned, to force a rethink. The resulting G43 was a functional weapon, but it arrived late, was produced in limited quantities, and never approached the battlefield presence the Garand had already established. Japan fared worse. Semi-automatic development programs were repeatedly abandoned, and Japanese infantry went through the entire war predominantly equipped with bolt-action Arisakas. The Imperial Japanese Navy, operating with greater independence, actually captured a Garand and attempted to reverse engineer it in a local cartridge. The mechanical copy worked. The N-block clip system did not translate cleanly, and the project was replaced with a fixed magazine design. By the time Japan surrendered, roughly 100 of these Type 4 rifles existed. None had seen combat. The Garand served through Korea and into the early years of Vietnam before being replaced by the M14, a rifle that attempted to modernize the concept but retained a full-power cartridge so close to the .30-06 that it solved almost nothing Peterson had already identified 30 years earlier. The real successor came later still, in the M16 and its intermediate 5.56 cartridge, the philosophical heir to the 276-round MacArthur had cancelled in 1932. The Garand's legacy was not simply the rifle itself. It was the proof, delivered in the mud of Bataan and the jungles of the Pacific and the hedgerows of Normandy, that semi-automatic fire at the individual soldier level changed what infantry could do. Every army that came after had to answer that proof. Most of them are still answering it today.